The Rook by Daniel O'Malley is a book I picked up from the library book sale, 25 cents. I don't even remember why I picked up this book. I remember seeing maybe the concept on the back. The concept is woman in a park wakes up. Her memory's just been erased, Jason Bourne style. She's surrounded by dead bodies, all wearing latex gloves. She does not know who she is. She opens up her coat pocket and finds a letter addressed to herself from the person that she was. And that is the beginning of The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. The front cover of the book describes it as On Her Majesty's Supernatural Secret Service, but that only scratches the surface of the influences of this book. This book is sort of a Men in Black meets James Bond meets a little bit of X-Men and throw in a dash of X-Files. Those four influences are definitely the biggest. The main character is Miffany Thomas. She wakes up in a park. She doesn't know who she is. She has to find, through these letters that have been placed on her body, she finds out that, she's been attacked, had her memory erased, and she doesn't know who she is. So while she's scrambling the fallout of this attack, she's trying to figure out, what she wants to do. And different letters tell her different things to do. So I'm going to continue, but the main character is Miffany. The person that she was before is Rook Thomas, so that's how I'll refer them from now on. Rook Thomas is able to direct her with these letters, telling her the backstory, little info dumps of the world of the Rook. So we find out that Miffany Thomas actually is a Rook. She is a high member level of this secret organization, very similar to like a supernatural MI5 of sorts. Her job is to oversee operations in order to suppress supernatural phenomena. So whenever a small incident happens, they have to cover it up and pretend it, it was a weather balloon or something of that nature. This book is of two fronts. The first is a sort of comedy of her trying to pretend to be this other person that she knows nothing about and only has letters to sort of shape, what she knows about things, her doing her homework. And the other half is the mystery of who attacked her, because since she's had her memory erased, she doesn't remember. So someone around her in her organization is out to get her, and she doesn't know who it is. So another thing I really liked about this is that it's awkwardly strange. There's like a weird sense of British humor, snarky attitudes, people puffing their chests and things like that. Miffany has the power to control other people's bodily movements if she can touch them. So she's almost like a mind control as long as she can touch them. However, she doesn't like to use her powers. That's the unique thing about Rook Thomas. She was a very meek person that was afraid of touching other people. So she sort of closed herself off and she became a very awkward, socially awkward person. However, she excelled in, being a nerd, basically doing accounting, doing, payroll, doing paperwork, things like that. And her counterpart, Rook Gestalt, he is a sort of field agent master guy. So they balance each other out because she does all the nerdy stuff and he does all of the field work. This book, I really enjoyed it, like a lot. This was like a page turner. I think this book is about 500 pages, but I blew through it in a couple of days. It's the kind of book where you just want to keep going. I was reading some reviews on Goodreads. Some people didn't like the back and forth nature because the way the book works is they'll have a small section of present day Miffany trying to get through her day, and then it'll alternate with a letter from Rook Thomas exploring, some aspect. Either it'll be like a story of her doing something or, an aspect of the organization. And there's a lot of world building in this book. I really like the way that everything's so detailed. They go into like, the organization is called the Cheque, and they've been alive for a really long time. The origins, there's also an American counterpart, and there's a villain that they're going after. They really go into, the author goes into really deep detail of all this. If there's one thing I didn't like about the book, it's that it tries to be a little bit too eccentric at times. For example, they'll just mention something out of the blue like, oh yeah, Detroit, wasn't there a unicorn there? And then they just don't follow up on that at all. So it tries to be a little bit too weird. Another example is that one of the characters mentions that they got a piece of information through one of the agents who could turn into a seagull. And I understand that the book is full of people with weird powers, like concept of the book is that they recruit people who have, they take away children from families that exhibit powers, take them to an estate, train them, and they become pawns for, you know, the organization. So Rook Thomas was a rook. Above her are two bishops, and then there's the Lord and Lady, the King and Queen. Below her are various pawns, and then there's also chevaliers or knights. They're like the sort of hand-to-hand combat experts. So pawns, you know, have various powers, sometimes useless, sometimes amazing. And one of the characters just mentions that they got the information from a pawn who could turn into a seagull. And that's quirky and fun, and just you could just imagine, but it just doesn't feel real compared to the others, like powers. They go into a lot of detail, like for example, something like, oh, this kid, when he cries, you know, the liquid can knock people out, so he's got to be careful not to lick his own face, and they use that for science or something. You can believe that, you know, maybe like there's some mutation in his eye where it becomes a sort of sleep potion or something like that you can explain with science. But a grown 150 to 200 pound man turning into a seagull just feels so out there. It'd be different if they tried to do something else, like the guy can control seagulls, or he talks to seagulls, or he has a psychic link with seagulls, or he can control birds or something. But they just didn't do enough research for that small segment. There's a throwaway, you know, mention that this guy could turn into seagulls, and it just doesn't feel like it fits with the rest. It just, sometimes there are parts of the book like that just sort of tries to be a little bit too weird and out there for the sake of it, and it just doesn't fit. I know he's trying to like sort of differentiate himself from the X-Men, because when you pick up an X-Men comic, you know about all the characters, like, you know, this guy has metal claws and healing, which are awesome powers, and then you never hear about the X-Men that completely suck, like I can hear things far away, or, you know, I can see through one wall at a time. And those would be like realistic powers that the world of the Rook would have. But then there's the weirdos that are in there that just don't seem like they have any real function, except to just for the author to mention it once and then never again, just for the hell of it. So that's my only complaint about the Rook, is that occasionally they'll have the weird throwaway, you know, reference. But overall, it was an incredibly fast read. It just had me from page one. I really enjoyed how the main character was different than usual. She wasn't some sort of gung-ho amazing at everything. In fact, she had to pretend to be someone not as outgoing as she wanted to be, because Miffany is, you know, a new being now because she's had her memories erased. She's basing everything off of these letters left by Rook Thomas. So she has to also stay undercover and not have anyone know that she's had her mind erased, or they might, you know, lock her up or do terrible things to her. Also, the villains are pretty interesting in this book. I don't want to go into it in too much detail, but pretty fascinating stuff. The Rook, incredible book for me. It's a weird mix of supernatural, with a lot of interesting, I like the mystery, I like the characters, everything was great. Definitely check out The Rook by Daniel O'Malley.